If you glance at a map of Britain today, it would be easy to assume that its boundaries are limited to the British Isles. Yet, on a global scale, the United Kingdom continues to govern 14 overseas territories, stretching from Gibraltar at the Gateway to the Mediterranean to the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic. These are the final vestiges of what was once a vast British Empire. Just over a century ago, the British Empire spanned a quarter of the world's land and ruled nearly a third of its people, earning its reputation as the empire on which the sun never set. The question remains, how did such a modest island nation rise to become the largest and most influential empire in history? This is the story of the British Empire. The roots of the British Empire reach back to a time before Britain existed as a unified state. For much of its past, the Kingdom of England was the preeminent force in the British Isles, boasting a robust economy and a formidable military. During the medieval and early modern eras, England extended its authority over the smaller independent realms of Wales and parts of Ireland. To the north, however, Scotland maintained its independence, fiercely defending itself against repeated invasions from its southern neighbor. By the early 1600s, Queen Elizabeth I of England had commissioned numerous explorers and traders to seek out and claim new lands not yet occupied by other European nations. Figures such as Sir Francis Drake and Sir Martin Frobisher claimed territories for England, though these claims seldom resulted in permanent settlements. The first English attempt at colonization in North America, on Roanoke Island in 1585, ended in mystery when the settlers vanished without a trace. Elizabeth I also granted royal charters to joint stock companies designed to expand overseas trade. Notable examples include the Levant Company, established in 1592, and the East India Company, founded in 1600, both of which received exclusive rights to trade in specific regions. Upon Elizabeth's death in 1603, the English crown passed to James VI of Scotland. With his accession, James ruled both Scotland and England, though the two kingdoms remained separate entities with distinct governments. As monarch, James sought to continue and expand upon his predecessor's colonial ambitions, organizing new settlements under three main types of colonial administration. A crown colony was governed directly by the monarch, usually through an appointed governor and a local council. Charter colonies, while similar, operated under corporate charters rather than royal governors, often granting settlers greater political freedoms. Proprietary colonies were managed by individuals, often the heads of joint stock companies, who held commercial responsibilities to shareholders and typically appointed local officials to govern in their stead. Over time, proprietary colonies proved challenging to oversee and were gradually converted into crown colonies. A significant but sometimes overlooked chapter in England's expansion was the plantation of Ulster, where Protestant settlers from England and Scotland were relocated to Northern Ireland during King James's reign. This model of structured colonization would serve as a template for future English ventures abroad, with many Ulster plantation leaders later playing roles in establishing colonies in the Americas. Throughout the 17th century, England expanded its colonial reach in North America and the Caribbean, founding new settlements and seizing others from rival powers, for instance, taking New York from the Dutch in 1665. England also built an extensive network of trading posts and fortified outposts in Africa and the East Indies. The Royal African Company, established in 1660, became a dominant force in the transatlantic slave trade, which, though brutal, was highly profitable. During this era, Scotland attempted to establish its own overseas colonies, inspired by England's successes. However, most of these efforts, including ventures in Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, and Carolina, were short-lived. The most catastrophic failure was the Darien Scheme of 1698, an attempt to control the overland trade route across the Isthmus of Panama. The Scottish public heavily financed the expedition, investing nearly a fifth of the nation's wealth. The settlers founded Caledonia and built New Edinburgh, but the colony quickly collapsed due to famine, disease, and Spanish attacks. Despite a resupply effort in 1699, the settlement was abandoned, and only a fraction of the original colonists survived to return home. The financial ruin caused by the Darien disaster plunged Scotland into crisis, leading many to believe that their future prosperity depended on joining England's burgeoning colonial enterprise. At the dawn of the 18th century, England and Scotland were still distinct nations, though the Glorious Revolution of 1688 had brought significant changes to the political order within the British Isles. The Catholic monarch James II was overthrown and succeeded by his Protestant daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William, who jointly ruled as King William III of both England and Scotland. In England, new laws were enacted to ensure that only Protestants could ascend the throne, but these restrictions did not extend to Scotland. Consequently, under Queen Anne's rule in the early 1700s, initiatives were undertaken to merge the parliaments of both countries and secure a Protestant succession for the monarchy. The passage of the Acts of Union in 1707 officially joined England and Scotland into a single nation called Great Britain. In the decades that followed, Britain became embroiled in numerous conflicts with other European states, with battles taking place both in Europe and wherever colonial interests intersected. Following Britain and its allies' victory in the War of the Spanish Succession, the subsequent peace treaties in 1714 awarded Britain new territories, including Newfoundland and Acadia in North America, as well as the strategically important Mediterranean islands of Gibraltar and Minorca. During this period, the British East India Company, though not formally part of the empire, vigorously pursued its own colonial ambitions, clashing with its French rival throughout the Indian subcontinent. After the pivotal Battle of Plassey in 1757, the company seized control of Bengal from the local Nawab and his French supporters, establishing itself as the dominant military and political force in the region. This victory enabled the company to further extend its influence, either by direct rule or through local leaders coerced by the company's private armies. The 18th century saw Britain gain even more territory through conflicts such as the War of the Austrian Succession and especially the 7 Years' War. In North America, British forces captured Quebec in 1759 and by annexing New France in 1760, effectively ended French ambitions on the continent. Britain also acquired Florida from Spain, consolidating control over nearly the entire eastern coastline of North America. The Treaty of Paris in 1763, which concluded the 7 Years' War, transferred additional Caribbean islands, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent, Vincent and the Grenadines, and Tobago to Britain, solidifying its position as the preeminent colonial and naval power of the era. Throughout its rise, the British Empire relied on two interlinked strengths: unrivaled naval dominance and a robust mercantile system insulated from foreign interference. The surge in trade brought enormous wealth to Britain, particularly through the taxation of goods passing through its ports. Yet, the very question of taxation would soon spark unrest, leading to revolution and the empire's first major loss of overseas territory. Despite considering its colonies as integral parts of the realm, Britain did not extend to them the same rights and privileges enjoyed by those residing on the British mainland. During the 19th century, Britain expanded its colonial reach by acquiring territories such as the Ionian Islands, Malta, Mauritius, St. Lucia, the Seychelles, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Ceylon, and the Cape Colony. Many Caribbean colonies in particular became centers for sugar cane production, a lucrative industry that depended almost entirely on enslaved labor. While Britain had already amassed significant wealth from the transatlantic slave trade, the emergence of the Industrial Revolution redirected the interests of British merchants and investors towards manufacturing goods domestically, rather than relying on slave-produced commodities from overseas. Mounting pressure from abolitionists eventually compelled Parliament to outlaw the slave trade within the empire in 1807, though the institution of slavery itself persisted for another 27 years until 1830, its formal abolition in 1834. The period between 1815 and 1914 is often referred to as Britain's imperial century, during which the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. Following the consolidation of British rule over India, the British East India Company sought to extend its influence further into Asia. Singapore was established as a trading hub in 1819 and became a colony by 1824. In China, after the First Opium War concluded in 1842, Britain gained control of Hong Kong and Shanghai, enhancing its foothold in the region. The East India Company's authority in India was severely tested by the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, a widespread uprising among Indian soldiers against British commanders. After suppressing the revolt, the British government dissolved the East India Company in 1858, bringing India under direct crown rule and designating it the jewel in the crown of the empire. In the 19th century, Britain's imperial ambitions were increasingly challenged by the Russian Empire, which sought to expand into Central Asia and the Mediterranean as the Ottoman Empire weakened. The Crimean War, 1854 to 1856, fought alongside France to support the Ottoman Turks, ended in a decisive defeat for Russia, and reinforced Britain's status as the world's leading imperial power. Tensions with Russia in Central Asia persisted, but a partial settlement known as the Great Game was reached in 1878, defining spheres of influence and resulting in Britain acquiring Cyprus from the Ottomans as a strategic outpost. Africa also became a focal point for British expansion. Immigration to the Cape Colony increased in the 1820s, displacing Dutch-descended Boers who established the Transvaal and Orange Free State. These republics were eventually brought under British control after the Second Anglo-Boer War ended in 1902, leading to the creation of the Union of South Africa in 1910. In North Africa, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 made Egypt crucial for British trade routes, prompting Britain to occupy Egypt militarily in 1882, though it was not formally annexed. The late 19th century scramble for Africa saw Britain secure much of eastern and southern Africa with ambitions for a Cape to Cairo railway, though this project was never completed. As the 20th century approached, Britain's dominance in global trade and its role as an international power allowed it to exert economic influence even over countries outside its empire. The completion of the all-red line telegraph network in 1902 enabled direct communication across Britain's vast colonial holdings. With economic and social development, predominantly white settler colonies began seeking greater autonomy. Canada became a confederation in 1867 with self-governing powers, followed by Australia and New Zealand, which achieved Dominion status in 1900. Ireland also pursued independence, but repeated Home Rule bills were blocked as British leaders feared it would threaten imperial unity. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 posed the greatest challenge yet to the empire. Britain relied heavily on its colonies and dominions for resources, food, and military manpower. Over 2.5 million men from across the empire served in the war, with many from Canada, India, Australia, and New Zealand making significant sacrifices. Britain emerged victorious, annexing new territories in the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific. But the war's enormous costs marked the beginning of imperial decline. Although the empire reached its largest territorial size in 1921, that same year Ireland gained independence, and demands for self-rule grew stronger throughout the empire. The onset of the Second World War in 1939 temporarily halted the process of decolonization as Britain once again turned to its imperial network for support. Although Britain ultimately emerged victorious from the war, the conflict left the nation financially exhausted and unable to maintain its vast and increasingly independent-minded empire. Over the course of the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, Britain gradually granted independence to its colonies and dominions. This widespread movement towards self-governance, often referred to as the Wind of Change, brought nearly 4 centuries of British colonial rule to a close. Despite gaining independence, most of these new nations maintained connections with Britain, choosing to join the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of former colonies and dominions. 14 of these countries also opted to retain the British monarch as their ceremonial head of state. For many, the most poignant and definitive end to the British Empire occurred in 1997, when Britain officially transferred sovereignty over Hong Kong to China. Nevertheless, the influence of the empire endures. English has become the most widely spoken language in the world, and British traditions, customs, and cultural practices continue to enjoy global popularity. Today, Britain itself reflects the diversity of its former empire, with people from a multitude of backgrounds, faiths, and cultures, many from lands once under British rule, now calling the British Isles home. In this way, modern Britain stands as a living testament to the far-reaching legacy of its imperial past.